The Explorer. The Explorer is one of the oldest known submarines to still exist today. The Submarine Explorer was built in Brooklyn by Julius Hermann Kroll from between 1863 and 1865. In 1866, she underwent tests in the East River in New York. Although the tests went well, attempts to sell the vessel to the US Navy fell through. However, the Explorer would quickly find another buyer and be shipped down to Panama. In order to do this, the Explorer was first broken down into pieces. It was then delivered by boat to Panama before being taken by steam train to the Pacific Ocean. Once she arrived there, she was painstakingly reconstructed for her new job as a pearl diving vessel. The submarine's construction was innovative for the time. Her hull was separated into 3 sections: a compressed air chamber beneath the upper hull, an internal working room for the crew, and 10 ballast tanks. Once at the required depth, the crew would be able to open hatches in the working room and explore the seafloor, gathering oysters and pearls. It wasn't a mechanical failure that led to the abandonment of the Explorer. It was due to a human mistake. In the late 1800s, the consequences of pressure on the human body caused by diving in deep water for a prolonged period of time were unknown. This was also the case when it came to decompression sickness, often known as caisson illness or the bends. This is caused by a buildup of nitrogen in the body that can prove fatal if not treated properly and quickly. After completing some dives for pearls and oysters off of Isla San Telmo in 1869, the crew became sick and died. Local reports at the time claimed that the team had been diving at depths of over 100 feet for hours on end before quickly resurfacing. Their cause of death was later determined to be from decompression sickness. A cure for the disease wouldn't be found until 1907, 38 years too late. The Submarine Explorer was abandoned in a cove in San Telmo Bay, where it sat undiscovered until the year 2000. A rusting shell of what it once was, the submarine is still there to this day. 7. The River Medway Subs. The River Medway in the UK isn't a place where you'd expect to find abandoned submarines. However, dozens of them can be found throughout the river. People crossing the Rochester Bridge by train or car may have observed a Russian submarine to the north of the bridge, just off the town of Shrewd. The U-475 Black Widow was a Cold War submarine that was retired from service and sold in 1994. It spent the next 4 years on the River Thames in England as a floating museum. Then in 1998, it was moved to Folkestone, where it was once again open to the public. In 2004, it ended up in Strood to be repaired and destroyed, but since then no work has been done on the vessel and it still sits abandoned to this day. Another submarine that can be found in the River Medway is the U-122 that was used by the German army during World War I. Following their defeat in 1918, U-122 was given to the UK as part of the war reparations between the two countries. With no use for the vessel after the war was over, it was towed through the river in order to be scrapped. However, U-122 broke loose when it was being towed. Instead of going back to recover it, the decision was made to simply leave it where it was. Although this might seem unthinkable today, it was the most sensible decision at the time. After World War I, the abundance of scrap metal out there made the price and demand for it incredibly low. It simply would have cost more to recover the vessel than it would be worth in scrap metal value. The 251-foot long submarine has now spent over 100 years rusting away in the mudflats of the river. And surprisingly, there's a lot of people living in the area that don't even know it's there. Although these are some of the more notable finds along the River Medway, at least 26 more submarines are thought to be abandoned here after being bought for scrap metal following the conclusion of World War I. 6. Aberlady Bay. Aberlady Bay is located on the coast of Scotland, just a 40-minute drive away from the country's capital of Edinburgh. It was the very first area in the UK to be designated as a nature reserve in 1952, but that's not the only thing that makes it special. Aberlady Bay is also home to 2 abandoned World War II-era submarines. The pair of X-class midget submarines are mostly hidden in the sand, giving them the appearance of big boulders. They've also deteriorated significantly. However, numerous details may still be recognized if you look closely enough. But how did they end up in Aberlady Bay? The 2 submarines weren't destroyed in a battle, but they definitely underwent some heavy beatings. They were towed to their current location in 1946, and each was tethered to a heavy concrete block to stop it from floating away. The vessels were then used for target practice, and they were fired upon by Royal Air Force pilots to see how their bullets would hold up when it came to taking down submarine hulls. One of the submarines has fared better than the other, and more features can be picked out on its exterior, such as its hatch. Both subs are often submerged by sea, but the best chance to see them is at low tide as they slowly emerge from the water. 5. USS Ling. The USS Ling is a US Navy Ballow-class submarine that was constructed in 1943 by the Philadelphia-based Cramp Shipbuilding Company. It's one of 5 surviving submarines of this class that still exists today. It was launched in 1945 as it entered military service in World War II. Less than a year later, the war ended, and the USS Ling was decommissioned. It wasn't abandoned just yet, though. After the war, it was designated as part of the Atlantic Reserve Fleet until 1960. It was then used as a training vessel at the Brooklyn Navy Yard until 1971. After it had served its purpose at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, the USS Ling was sent to be scrapped. However, she was rescued by the Submarine Memorial Association and was transported to Hackensack, New Jersey to become a floating museum. Unfortunately, tragedy would strike in 2012 when Hurricane Sandy swept across the United States. The Hackensack River was flooded, which in turn damaged the submarine and the museum. By 2016, the museum was forced to close, and because the USS Ling sprung a leak in 2018, it's unlikely that it'll be restored anytime soon. If you were able to name your very own submarine, what would you call it? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe while you're at it. 4. U-352. The U-352 was a German submarine that was employed during the infamous U-boat assaults along the North Carolina coast during World War II. U-352 was a member of Group Schley and was instructed, along with 12 other U-boats, to congregate west of Rockall and begin scouting for convoys in April 1942. Because of the offensive building up of the United States East Coast, this mission was cancelled shortly after it was launched. U-352 would return to the East Coast that next month, where it would unsuccessfully attempt to take down a Swedish merchant ship known as the SS Friden. Over the course of 2 days, 4 torpedoes would be launched from the U-352 at the Friden, with each one missing its target. However, the crew evacuated onto life rafts just in case, and the captain turned the ship head-on towards the U-boat. Although this was done to make the Friden a smaller target, the German submarine's crew thought they were getting ready to ram them at full speed, so they cooled off their attack. After floating in the water on their lifeboats for a few hours, the crew of the SS Friden would drift past their untouched ship and reboard. They then continued on their journey as if nothing had happened. On May 9, 1942, U-352 would spot its next target. However, this engagement would also be unsuccessful, eventually leading to its demise. Icarus, a 165-foot United States Coast Guard cutter, was observed by the sub's crew near Cape Lookout, and so they moved in to attack. The U-boat fired a torpedo, but they missed again. The Icarus, however, was right on target. It fired 5 depth charges from its Y-gun, which severely damaged U-352. The German sub then tried faking its death by laying motionless on the bottom of the ocean, hoping that Icarus would move on. However, it continued to fire depth charges, forcing the submarine to the surface. With a burst of heavy machine gun fire, U-352 was sunk, making it the first German U-boat to be lost during the Battle of the Atlantic. The wreck remained undiscovered until 1974, when it was located by Captain George Purifoy and his associates. These days, the wreckage of U-352 is a popular dive site filled with marine life. 3. Questa 1. Questa 1 is otherwise known as the Yellow Submarine. It was built in 1967 out of scrap metal in Brooklyn, New York by Jerry Bianco. His aim was to use the vessel to travel to the SS Andrea Doria, a famous shipwreck of a cruise liner. He wanted to salvage some of the valuable items still left on board, which included things like unopened safes, diamonds, and other precious metals. Bianco's idea was to dive down to the wreck using Questa 1. Then he would install inflatable dunnage bags inside the sunken ship. The cruise liner would then rise to the surface once the bags were filled with enough air, allowing it to be towed to a safer location where it could be salvaged of its riches. The Questa 1 was painted bright yellow, not out of reference to a famous Beatles song, but because it was the shade that Bianco could get the best deal on. The submarine was ready to launch in 1970, and it was lowered into the waters off of Coney Island by a crane. However, as it was being dropped into the water, an issue with the crane caused Questa 1 to list to one side when it hit the surface, making it unusable. The submarine was taken to a dock where Bianco continued to work on it in order to get it back into working order. But by this point, the investors who'd helped finance the project backed out, leaving no source of income to continue working on Questa 1. Bianco had no choice but to abandon the project, leaving the submarine at the mercy of thieves and vandals. 11 years after its fated accident at launch, further misfortune would strike Questa 1 as a storm managed to break it loose from its moorings in 1981. This subsequently lodged the submarine in the sandbank of Coney Island Creek. The infamous yellow paint is now rusted to an orange hue, but you can still see the Questa 1 poking out of the water around Coney Island today. 2. Foxtrot B-80. Amsterdam is home to some crazy things, and one of those things is an abandoned Soviet submarine from the Cold War. The Foxtrot B-80 lies in Amsterdam's waters, and no one wishes to claim it. As a result, the submarine has become every urban explorer's dream. The Foxtrot was built in 1956 as part of the Russian Navy, which was using heavy submarine presence at the time due to the need for surveillance during the war. After being abandoned, it was temporarily utilized as a presentation venue in 2002, but 3 years later, it was closed to the public. Since then, the unloved submarine has supposedly lingered in Amsterdam waters due to unpaid towing fees by several of its owners. Weirdly enough, the submarine isn't even a B-80 either. When it was brought by Dutch investors, which is how it ended up in Amsterdam, it was thought to be one of the fabled B-80 class submarines. However, the Dutch buyers were in for a surprise when they realized what they'd purchased was, in fact, a much older Zulu V-class vessel. Adventurers who decided to board the Foxtrot B-80 to explore its cramped corridors and spaces can feel like they're stepping back in time. Old equipment and gauges still have their Russian instructions and labels, and even the missile loading chambers are painted with red and blue Soviet stars. However, exploring the submarine does come with its risks. Since it's been abandoned for so long, the vessel is starting to deteriorate. Although there have been discussions about removing the Foxtrot B-80 from Amsterdam due to safety concerns, no concrete plan has been made yet. 1. The narco submarines. Over the years, drug runners have had to come up with some innovative ways to avoid being detected by authorities. In 2005, it became clear that drug gangs were constructing their own makeshift submarines to carry narcotics and other illegal contraband to their clients underwater. Although not much is known about the illegal submarine trade, they're thought to be manufactured in Colombia, Ecuador, or Guyana, according to officials. At one time, the submarines were so elusive that some authorities even questioned the existence of the illicit vessels, as they were unable to find any. They assumed that the submarines were just rumors to keep them off of the true means of transportation for some of the cartels. The Coast Guard even has a nickname for them, the White Buffalo of the Seas. However, over time, more and more submarines have been apprehended in various countries across South America and Mexico. For example, a submarine carrying more than a ton of cocaine heading for Mexico was intercepted off the coast of Peru in December of 2019. At the time, authorities reported that the vessel was loaded near the Peruvian border in Ecuador, and that it was the first such drug trafficking submarine ever seized in Peru. Further tip-offs have led to other submarine discoveries. Near the town of Barra de la Cruz in Mexico, officials were alerted to the presence of an abandoned drug-running submarine. Although they didn't find anyone or any illegal substances on board, it seemed highly likely that if it hadn't been intercepted, the craft would have been used to transport drugs further up the Mexican coast. With the majority of drugs exported from locations such as Peru, it seems clear that the underwater war on drugs is set to continue for some time. Which one of these abandoned submarines did you find the most fascinating to learn about? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye!